Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Extremely excited for this video as I'm going to break down a huge aspect of my draft evaluation process, my philosophy in evaluating specifically perimeter players on the offensive end of the floor. I'm extremely excited for this video. I've never recorded any type of video like this, so I really hope you guys do enjoy. If you do, since it's really unique, leave a like on today's video and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I really am excited for this video, and I hope you guys are as well, because we're going to be talking about dribble, pass, and shoot, and the three fundamental offensive perimeter skill sets that really make or break NBA players and especially NBA draft prospects. So this video is going to really dive into a bunch of examples of these three skills in relation to each other, the importance of all three of them, and how that really impacts my evaluation of draft prospects. I'm very, very excited for that. I'm really looking forward to this video, so I hope you guys do enjoy. And without further ado, let's jump into it here now with my video preview. The fundamental skills of perimeter offensive basketball are dribble, pass, and shoot. In this video, we're going to talk about how those three really relate to each other, how they function together on the basketball court. We're going to also talk about how I individually evaluate each of those traits as well, because it's not just about their three-point shooting percentage. It's not just about how many highlight handles do they have and how many assists do they average per game. There's a lot of things, there's a lot of little nuances that go into those three traits specifically on whether or not I believe these players are going to be good dribble, pass, shoot players at the next level. Then there's going to be historical examples we talk about in this video, players who ended up being draft busts, players who ended up being draft steals, MVPs. We're going to talk about a bunch of different types of players in this video that embody both dribble, pass, and shoot, and players who didn't embody those three things all in unison. But then we'll talk about the value of having all three of those skills in unison. And then to conclude the video, we'll talk about some 2024 NBA draft prospects that I do think embody dribble, pass, shoot. And remember, at the heart of my evaluation is dribble, pass, shoot, but I do have a disclaimer here. This video is simply focusing on offensive skills. So defense is very important. It matters, especially come playoff time. Players who are smaller do have a real disadvantage, whether that's from a wingspan perspective, whether that's just length, frame, size. Those are limitations, and at times I've been burned by that in the past. For example, coming out of Oklahoma, I was very skeptical of Trae Young and how he would work in the NBA. Well, guess what? I overlooked my own philosophy way too much. He is an excellent and absolutely phenomenal dribble, pass, shoot type of player, which is why I wanted to really focus in on this video on what I've learned from that mistake, specifically when I was not high enough on Trae Young coming into his draft class in the 2018 draft. And things I've learned in the last half decade plus of evaluation. I'm only 24 years old, so I'm still learning a ton, but I do have a lot of historical players in this video I want to talk about, because when it does come to evaluation, physical aspects like height, weight, athleticism, wingspan, that stuff does matter. That stuff plays a real impact in NBA basketball. But I still do believe that the skills, specifically offensively, are the primary dictators of success for guards especially, but for some really talented wings as well. So we're going to talk about a bunch of different types of players in this video, and I wanted to start really with the shooting component, because I do think this is the most essential trait in today's game. The two teams that shot the most three-pointers in the NBA this past season, guess who they were? The Boston Celtics and Dallas Mavericks, the two teams that are facing each other in the NBA Finals, and I do not think that is accidental. The teams that have really valued the three-point shot and shooting gravity, where Boston has 5 players on the floor at all times who can shoot the ball really, really well, that really has a real stark impact on who is going to win games, because of how much of a bind it puts defenses in. It makes it very tough to help. So what are some areas I evaluate when it comes to shooting? Standstill shooting is one of the most important things. That's one of the most talked about things, especially when you're looking at 3-and-D wing prospects. You're looking at players who are going to be reliable marksmen from deep. How do they operate in catch and shoot scenarios, which is most frequent when you're going to see standstill shooting opportunities? How do they catch and shoot the basketball? Obviously, we have a lot of data, a lot of analytics that give us those numbers, but also from the eye test. Do they get their feet set? How do the mechanics look? All of those things play into it as well. Then one of the most underrated components in all of draft theory, in my opinion, and something I am significantly higher on than anybody else, in my opinion, is off the move shooting. Guys who are really, really adept at working off of screens, working to specific spots on the floor, on the move, off of flares, off of pins, off of ghost actions like Buddy Hield does a good deal, especially when he's back playing with Indiana next to Tyrese Halliburton. I think off the move shooting and playing off the catch off of that is extremely valuable. It really just opens up a wide range of opportunities for your head coach. If you have a creative head coach, guys who can function off the move as a shooter becomes so valuable because of the difficulty it puts on defenses to properly navigate screens off the basketball and all of the difficulties that places on teams. We've seen Steph Curry, Klay Thompson tear the league apart like that. In this year's draft, maybe someone like Dalton Knecht could become a really dynamic off the move shooter. We also have live dribble shooting, and this is one of the biggest transformations throughout NBA history, especially in the last 15-20 years, where you're looking at players who, back in the 2000s, first of all, it was an inside-centric game, and I still do think that getting inside the paint, getting to the rim is extremely important and still at the heart of good NBA offense right now. But the number of opportunities and the types of looks teams are taking have shifted away from post-up play and just pick and roll with the idea of two people getting to the rim and hopefully finishing with, an offensive rebound, anything like that. Really, the game has transformed to a wider degree of difficulty, and players like James Harden, Luka Doncic, Damian Lillard, Steph Curry have all really helped usher in this new style of play as well because of how dominant they've been playing in certain styles, where you see the pull-up jump shot, you see the step-back three, you see fadeaways. Someone like Dirk Nowitzki, who really transformed the game as well with his one-legged fadeaway. We've seen that mimicked by Kevin Durant and many other superstars as well in the league. Shooting is really at the heart of NBA basketball. If you look at the 2011 Mavericks, I think one of the first teams to really understand the value of putting shooting around their stars. Think about that team next to Dirk Nowitzki, Jason Kidd, and Jason Terry. They had J.J. Barea as their downhill facilitator. Obviously, Tyson Chandler was their defensive anchor, but they surrounded that core nucleus with guys who could shoot. Deshaun Stevenson got hot in the playoffs. Peja Stojakovic. They had Brian Cardinal. They just had a bunch of different players. Shawn Marion was shooting a ton of corner threes at the time. The Mavericks at that point in time were loaded with that. You think about the 2012-2013 Heat, adding in Ray Allen. The Spurs always had a pretty good dose of shooting around Tim Duncan and Tony Parker. There's just a lot of smart, high-opportunity basketball that comes alive from having shooting on the floor, and I think the scoring gravity most specifically. So in this video, I'm going to talk a ton about shooting, because when you don't have shooting on the floor, what happens is teams put their best rim protector on the worst shooter. We saw that against Oklahoma City in the playoffs, where the Mavericks put Derek Lively at times or Daniel Gafford at times on Josh Giddey. Against the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Mavericks shrunk way off of Kyle Anderson. And that's something that the Indiana Pacers, who made a really nice run in the playoffs to the Eastern Conference Finals, they didn't have anyone that you could really hide on, because that team is full of guys who are capable of shooting. At the center spot specifically, Miles Turner has been a mismatch nightmare this season especially, and since getting Tyrese Halliburton there, the two of them have really formed a unique two-man game. I just think shooting and scoring gravity, and the question, does a team have to guard you, really changes the complexion of offenses and how they look. The best offenses in the NBA typically are the ones that generate the most open looks from three, and especially when you have good shooters on the floor. The Mavericks right now around Luka Doncic, we've seen in the finals, the role players haven't been capable of hitting especially above the break threes. If they had more actual true shooting on the roster, maybe it would be a different story right now in the NBA Finals. Obviously, there's other components to team building, but shooting, I do think, is at the heart of good NBA offense. Having shooting around your stars and having stars who can shoot really just elevate what your team is going to be capable of doing offensively. Then when it comes to dribbling, there's a bunch of different aspects to evaluate, because there's a bunch of different guys who are great at dribbling, and they do it in very unique, different ways. You can be an elite dribbler with your elite change of pace or change of direction, and the best ones can do both. So if you think about prime James Harden, he would lull you to sleep with that between the legs crossover, waiting for you to reach, and then all of a sudden he steps on the gas, blows by you really quickly, gets 2 feet to the paint, he's getting to his floater, he's finishing above the rim, especially in his prime, or he's lobbing the ball up to Clint Capella. He also has that change of direction. You think about him and the threat he was going downhill. He gets guys turned around, and then all of a sudden his change of direction wasn't even left to right. It was forward left to backward right, where he's going to that step back to his right side to get that left-handed three-pointer off. Change of pace, change of direction, the most important things when it comes to evaluating dribbling, in my opinion. But there's other key components as well. How a prospect handles on-ball pressure. We don't get to see a ton of this, especially in the college game. I think full court pressing and just pressing in general, even if it's half court pressing, is underutilized in college basketball, and definitely something that could be used more. And I think it would also help our evaluation of guys who can dribble. There's a lot of examples of guys who came into the league with the expectation of being point guards, and all of a sudden they're not a point guard anymore. We'll talk about a couple of those players later in this video. Quickness, I think, is a super important thing, whether that's in the pick and roll, but especially in isolation. You have to have a quick first step. That downhill burst, someone like Isaiah Collier really has that in this year's draft. Long speed, super important. You think about De'Aaron Fox. You think about some of the fastest players. Tyrese Maxey's another great example of this. Even if their dribbling isn't the most impressive, it's being able to push the ball out in front of them. Even some forwards and big men. Domantas Sabonis does a really great job pushing the ball in transition. Draymond Green's been one of the best transition pace pushers for a long time in the NBA. So long speed plus quickness is some of the more dynamic ball handlers when it comes to creating opportunities that look like maybe they won't be there. Playing up-tempo, another key part of the revolution of basketball in the last 20 years. Up-tempo play, quickness, speed, definitely important traits when it comes to dribbling upside. Then we have tight space creativity. That's where someone like Kyrie Irving comes into play. Very different ball handler than James Harden. I think James Harden is the better ball handler, to be completely honest with you, because he's more reliable in one-on-one situations. You think about probably the most dominant isolation player in NBA history at times. Just was absolutely fearsome in his ability to go get a bucket, and 99% of his buckets came off of his handle. So Kyrie Irving definitely has probably, I would say, cooler handles, more creative in tight spaces like I'm talking about. But I do think Harden's was more reliable because of the change of pace, change of direction. That was just a little bit more dynamic than Kyrie Irving at his best. But both of them, obviously, two elite ball handlers, two of the best to ever do it. And then you have functional advantage creation as well, which is really just getting to spots. So someone like DeMar DeRozan, who probably doesn't have the flashiest handle package, but he's really adept at using his handle and his body, whether that's with a back down or with a quick crossover, to get to spots on the floor that he can get to, rise up, and make jump shots consistently. Kevin Durant's really good at this as well. I think this is something Anthony Edwards has gotten a lot better at in recent history. And someone like Luka Doncic is really good at dribbling too, using his big frame, protecting the basketball in different ways. He doesn't have the most creative handle, but he is just flat out a really good ball handler because he's safe, secure with the ball, handles pressure well. Change of pace is really essential for Luka Doncic too, even though he doesn't have, again, the most creative handle. He's got just a really dynamic play style because of that change of pace, change of direction, especially for someone like Doncic with his frame. We also have passing. Obviously, these three key traits are at the center of fundamental offense, fundamental perimeter offensive creation in basketball. And the areas to evaluate here: pick and roll decision making. Can they make strong side reads all the way to weak side reads? So if you're handling in the pick and roll, let's say we're setting up our prospect to go to his right hand, in the right corner, can he see if the strong side defender helps in on the ball handler? If so, that should be an easy dot to the corner. Can he also read the roll man? If he's able to draw in the big, well, guess what? You're then going to be able to either feed the big on a little pocket pass or maybe a lob. Those are things that you want to see. That's something Trae Young was elite at in Oklahoma, something obviously Luka Doncic has blossomed in as well, becoming one of the most prolific lob passers in the NBA today. And then I think the most important thing, and this is how you can tell you have a really special passing prospect, can he consistently make reads on the weak side of the floor? So not only when he's in the pick and roll, if the strong side corner man doesn't help in and they're able to effectively tag the roller, can he see over the defense to the opposite side corner and deliver an accurate, precise pass? Those are some of the most important things to evaluate, and that's where size really does come into play. The bigger the prospect you have, the more likely he's going to be able to see over that defense. It opens up a ton of passing angles and really just, I think, weaponizes the rest of the team around said player, which is super important. Advantage creation. Again, this comes off of your dribbling. Your dribbling kind of ties into your passing. If you're able to get downhill and create, well, it's because your dribble probably got you there, but then you're looking at drive and kick opportunities. You're looking at downhill decision making. So prospects in the past like Cam Whitmore, who really struggled as a passer at Villanova. That was one of the big knocks on him as a wing coming into the draft. Someone like Cody Williams in this year's draft, I think, has a lot more upside as a passer, has really flashed some of those playmaking, kind of feel that he has, and potential live ball handling decision making, which is very impressive for a wing prospect. Now, I do have accuracy versus precision on here. You might be saying, okay, what does that really have to do with passing in the level of basketball, in the world of basketball? Well, accuracy is putting the ball on the player's frame or around the player's frame. Obviously, guys are able to, especially at the NBA level, move to the ball, adjust their bodies, and still get good shots up, good looks up. But precision is putting the ball in the shooting pocket. And that's something some of the best passers in the world, you think back to Rajon Rondo during his playing days, he was an elite passer, elite playmaker. And again, that size, again, outside of guys like Rajon Rondo, someone probably the best passer in NBA history, a lot of people would say Magic Johnson really excelled using his size as a downhill facilitator. Larry Bird was extremely creative with his passing, and it really stemmed from his passing vision. Could see the whole floor, was a dynamic transition passer most specifically. So as you can see, all three of the traits are extremely important when it comes to winning basketball. We're going to talk about what that really looks like when you tie all three of them together in a little bit. But first, I want to talk about some flaws that prospects have had and what we've learned from those things. Dribble and pass, but no shot is no good. That is one of the first and foremost obvious conclusions here with my evaluation on the importance of shooting, especially for perimeter players. If you have a perimeter player who can't shoot, you better plan on him being your primary on-ball player, or you better plan on playing him at center. Like, with the way the game is played today, it becomes very, very difficult if you have a point guard or just a guard in general who cannot shoot the basketball. Killian Hayes was a player I really did not like in his draft class because I really did not trust his shot. He did not shoot the ball at all very well in his time in France. And a lot of people, even some prominent NBA quote-unquote scouts and analysts, had him number one on their board. I will never understand how they got to that conclusion other than maybe just watching highlights. People called him the French James Harden. Just because he was left-handed and had a step back doesn't mean he was good, because he couldn't make any of his shots. Now, he can dribble, he can pass, and there are some physical traits he had too. He had pretty good positional size, but clearly that shot was the biggest detriment to his game. Never became an efficient offensive player, and because of that, he is now already out of the NBA before the conclusion of his actual first rookie contract. Tyreke Evans, a little bit of a throwback here. Now, this is where scoring gravity is a little bit different than shooting. Tyreke Evans was a scorer, but he wasn't a three-point shooter, which is okay, especially the time that he played. We're talking a different era of NBA basketball, so this is not meant to be a shot at all at Tyreke Evans. I actually loved watching Tyreke Evans play. Fun player, a lot of downhill force, could get to spots on the floor and score. And by the end of his career, when three-point shooting became more prevalent, he did improve drastically as a three-point shooter. So this is not to bash Tyreke Evans at all, but coming into the NBA, he just did not have a reliable jump shot. I think his first year in the league, he shot like 26% from three or something. I'll never forget the half-court shot he banked in at one point. I think it was a game winner even his rookie year when he ended up winning Rookie of the Year that season. I loved watching Tyreke Evans play, but one of the biggest flaws in his actual overall game was he just couldn't reliably knock down perimeter jump shots. And then Ben Simmons. We've seen how that's worked in postseason play the last few years when he had opportunities with Philadelphia. Obviously, he hasn't been able to stay on the court, unfortunately, for Brooklyn. But Ben Simmons has had some really tough playoff runs, and it's because teams sag way off of him. He hasn't been aggressive enough as a downhill scorer. I do think overall still, with the physical traits that Ben Simmons possesses, the quality of passer he is, the quality of defender he is, and the creativity he has with his handle, I do still think he could be a very good player in today's NBA, but it would have to be with a very creative coach who can put him into situations with a lot of shooting around him to find really the best case scenario for Ben Simmons' career to play out a specific way. But Obviously, we've seen the flaws with him as a point guard. Now let's talk about another collection of traits where it just doesn't work out very well. We're talking about dribbling and shooting, but no real playmaking, no passing ability here. Someone like Rashad McCants, again, another throwback. Quite some time ago, Rashad McCants played for the Minnesota Timberwolves, got traded to the Sacramento Kings. Just did not work out in the league, even though he was a very dynamic shot creator, could handle the basketball, create a shot. Those were some of the biggest traits he had coming into the NBA that people were betting on. Just never really worked out. Now, again, these are varying levels of players, right? Rashad McCants did not have a very long career. The other two guys on the graphic here, Tim Hardaway Jr. and Eric Gordon, did. These guys had very good careers, made a lot of money each, but there were some real definitive flaws in their game. Tim Hardaway Jr. dribble and shoot. He could create for himself. These are kind of your microwave scorers, but not guys you would trust with your offense, not guys you would put the ball in their hands to make a play. At the end of the game, maybe they end up taking the last shot, but usually it's going to be in someone else's hands to create the advantage and then make the right decision out of that. That's something where, again, Eric Gordon, who he would always spam that little between-the-leg crossover that he loved, super loose handle, but found ways to get to the rim and obviously found ways to score and shot a ton of deep threes throughout his career. Tim Hardaway Jr. is one of the most impressive forget the last possession shooters I've ever seen. He could airball probably 3 straight times, and the next time down he would want to shoot again on a pull-up 3. So these are players who, again, you're looking at these 3 traits, and when you are missing a key trait, there are significant downfalls to some of these players. Someone like Tim Hardaway Jr., a really good shooter, pretty solid handle, not a good enough passer. Eric Gordon, a not very bad decision maker in my opinion, but had a unique handle, could really shoot the ball, especially from deep, but still had a ton of flaws in his NBA game. These are guys who can pass and shoot, but not really dribble as much, not really individual primary creators. Now, Alex Caruso is capable of creating. Again, these are varying levels of players. And with Peja Stojakovic on the screen here, I mean late career Peja Stojakovic. I'm aware of young Peja, how good of a player he was. He was really dynamic and could do a ton of things. I'm talking about late career Peja Stojakovic, who was more of a spot-up shooter, a connective passer. Another guy who could maybe make this graphic would be Nick Batum, who has really settled into being a good ball reverser on the perimeter and knocking down perimeter jump shots for the most part. Obviously, earlier in Nick Batum's career, he had a little bit more downhill juice when he was playing for the Portland Trailblazers. Nemanja Bjelica played a really important role for the Golden State Warriors as a play finisher and another kind of connector in their offense as a facilitator. When he was coming over, first played for the Minnesota Timberwolves, he was a former EuroLeague MVP. So he obviously had a lot of success and experience with the ball in his hands more, but in his NBA career found more to be a passer and shooter, not just a on-ball player prolifically. And that's kind of what I'm talking to here. Again, these aren't terrible players. So the absence of some of these traits aren't like condemning to their careers. You saw the difference between pass and shoot with no dribbling compared to passing and dribbling without shooting. I think the absence of shooting is very, very drastically terrible for a lot of guys. Now let's look at guys who are shooters but don't really do too much else. Primarily just shoot the basketball. They don't really dribble or pass. Again, we're just talking about the offensive side of the basketball. Michael Porter Jr., one of the best shooters I've ever seen because he shoots whatever shot he is given. Super contested, doesn't matter. He's going to get a shot up. Buddy Hield, obviously someone I've talked about already, who is a really good movement shooter, one of the more prolific three-point shooters in NBA history. Just always at the top of the league in three-point volume and three-point success rate. You could look at a guy like Malik Beasley as well. Kyle Korver really mastered this as well. You think about someone who started his career in the early 2000s. For him to have had the career that he had, JJ Redick could also fit into this, although Redick could do a little bit of the dribbling, a little bit of the passing. I think these three guys really well established what shooting without the ability to dribble or pass at a high level still looks like. And remember, this is NBA level evaluation here. Obviously, if you drop these guys into a lifetime fitness run, these guys could dribble and pass better than anyone at lifetime. Okay, I'm talking about NBA caliber evaluation, NBA talent evaluation. These guys are not primary ball handlers, never anyone you would want to run your offense through, but they can be really dynamic play finishers for a team with their spacing, the gravity, and someone like Michael Porter Jr., who's extremely unique physically at 6'10", he can shoot over the top of everybody. Buddy Hield has very unique gravity with the way he moves off the basketball. And Kyle Korver was one of the grandfathers of movement shooting and playing off of off-ball screens and just being a laser from three. Kyle Korver was one of my favorite players to watch growing up. Again, I'm only 24 years old, so I'm still learning a lot as we kind of go through draft classes. There's a lot I learned from each and every draft class. But someone like Kyle Korver, these players are valuable. These are guys who play in rotations, even though they don't have a wide range of awesome tools to work with. Their shooting, especially when they're as good of shooters as these three guys are very valuable to have on the basketball floor. Now let's look at guys who can dribble, but not really shoot or pass. And this is where scoring gravity really matters. Let's start with Jordan McLaughlin, who is pictured on the far right of your graphic here. Jordan McLaughlin, I think in a vacuum, can pass the ball pretty well. I think he's got a high IQ. I think he's capable of being a facilitator. But the biggest issue is nobody respects him in the NBA as a scorer or a jump shooter. And what that causes to have happen is not only does his primary defender sag off of him, but it allows the other four defenders to tightly glue their guys. And it removes the ability for driving kicks. And as a result, even though I think he's got pretty good passing vision, passing feel, and fairly decent passing accuracy, the lack of scoring gravity from Jordan McLaughlin is so devastating for his game that he's just not guarded, and as a result, never draws two to the basketball and doesn't create consistent advantage, even though, again, he's got a pretty solid handle and I think he can pass the ball pretty well. Teams don't need to worry about his passing as much because they don't respect his scoring. Someone like Johnny Flynn coming out of Syracuse, there was a lot of upside with him, perceived upside that is, when you looked at, his physical traits. He threw down some monster dunks in college, and obviously they were hopeful for the upside with Johnny Flynn. The issue is he got to the NBA, wasn't an NBA level shooter, and definitely wasn't an NBA level point guard as a facilitator. There's a reason in that draft that Minnesota drafted 2 point guards, the other one being Ricky Rubio, who was a significantly better passer. And at the time, I'm not sure if they were planning on Johnny Flynn being this combo guard for them. Imagine if they drafted Steph Curry, that maybe would have worked out a little bit better. You can't completely fault them. Steph didn't want to be in Minnesota, but at the same time, they could have just drafted him and said, well, suck it up, Buttercup, you're going to play for us. They didn't do that. Instead, they drafted Johnny Flynn. It didn't work out for them. And another one here, this is a throwback, Peyton Siva, who played for Louisville, did not have a very long NBA career. I believe only played like 24 NBA games or something, was not successful in the NBA. Big reason of that, so this is a player who he could handle ball pressure well, he could initiate, run an offense, but he just didn't have the scoring gravity or the facilitating as a downhill playmaker, a downhill advantage creator to become an actual quality NBA player at any point in time. So these three guys are really, I think, in my opinion, good examples of players who could dribble, but not really shoot or pass to the level that you have to be able to, as especially guards in the NBA. And then you look at guys who can really pass the basketball, but not really dribble or shoot it. And growing up, this is a play style that I really love. Guys who had great feel for the game. A lot of these guys positional size as well. Someone like Dante Exum, who I loved coming into his draft. Someone I learned a lot from and later completely revamped my draft philosophy. Even I think I was like probably 13 years old when Dante Exum was drafted, something like that. Maybe older. I don't even know right now. All the draft classes are blurring together for me. But Kendall Marshall of the Phoenix Suns, at one point in his career, averaged 8 assists per game in the NBA. That's probably the most random stat you've heard today. But Kendall Marshall could pass. And his time at UNC, he was a floor general point guard, but he never shot the ball well. He couldn't really dribble and create advantage for himself. And as a result of that, he just didn't have a good, long NBA career. Dante Exum, again, I bought into this positional size. I liked his creativity as a passer. The issue is he couldn't handle the ball against pressure very well. That's something we still see when he's playing for the Dallas Mavericks, as he's really moved from a big point guard as a draft prospect to a small forward, a smaller wing who, yes, gives you some tertiary playmaking, gives you, again, he's really blossomed as a shooter. We're evaluating what he was as a draft prospect, which was not a good jump shooter. It has taken him a long time to really figure out that outside shot. He's finally got it to a point where it's very respectable in the NBA. but it took him a long time. And Utah, who drafted him in the lottery, never got to see the benefits of that when they drafted him. Marcelo Huertas, who played for the Lakers for a while, has some really funny plays throughout his career. If you've, I'm sure you've seen compilations of some of the craziest NBA plays. Huertas has a couple on that list, but he had really good passing feel. Someone like Milos Teodosic as well, one of the best European passers ever you could consider in this list. Ricky Rubio. Now, Rubio could dribble and Teodosic could dribble, so I didn't include them really in the graphic as much here. But again, they didn't really have that shooting gravity, that scoring gravity to really open up the game for them and just make them awesome players. So now you might be wondering, okay, what does the combination of all three of these traits look like when it comes to specific players, specific prospects, and what are the varying levels of this? So we've got an MVP on the far right in Steve Nash. We've got someone who had MVP votes this year, but coming out of college was viewed as a safe but low ceiling player in Jalen Brunson. And on the left, we had someone who I loved all draft cycle last year in Brandon Podziemski, and someone who multiple times last year I referenced this draft philosophy of dribble, pass, shoot. And when you have all three of these traits in unison, you have a good player. You have a good NBA player, someone who can fit on the floor and work around other players. You think about the way Oklahoma City is building their roster or the way Boston has built their roster. These are just flat out good players. These are guys who offensively don't have significant weaknesses. Brandon Podziemski can shoot the basketball, so he can play off the rock. He can also handle in the pick and roll. He can push in transition. Obviously, there's little things that Podziemski does very well as well. Take charges defensively. Obviously, he rebounds the ball decently well for his position. That was something he did really well at Santa Clara. Funny enough, two Santa Clara players on this graphic, I just realized, with Nash. But there's more than just these three guys that really embody dribble, pass, shoot. A lot of your stars embody this. Luka Doncic, obviously, is someone who does. Pretty much all of the top-end players in the NBA. But it's not just your top-end players. There's also specific players who fit into these traits a little bit. Someone like Baylor Shireman, coming into this year's draft, is going to be able to dribble, pass, and shoot to varying extents. Now, I'm not going to talk about him too much in this video, but I do like Baylor Shireman quite a bit as a dribble, pass, shoot guy. Quite typically, the players who are capable of dribble, pass, and shoot work the best at the NBA level, especially come playoff time. Think about Al Horford, someone who you would never classify as a true superstar or a multi-time All-Star. Maybe, I think he might have an All-Star appearance or two, especially from his earlier days in Atlanta. But guys who can dribble, pass, and shoot, they just are hard to play against because they don't make a ton of mistakes. Derek White's another great example of a dribble, pass, shoot player. There's just these players who can dribble, pass, and shoot. Like Kyrie Irving's a dribble, pass, shoot guy. They're just really well-rounded players offensively. Of course, you know, finishing comes into effect, but if you're not a shooter, if you're not someone who can shoot the basketball, teams are not going to close out onto you, and as a result, it's harder to finish because they're probably going to be sagging off of you, taking away some of your driving lanes, and just limiting your overall effectiveness as a driver of the basketball. So, again, at the heart of my NBA draft philosophy, especially for offensive perimeter players, dribble, pass, shoot is really the name of the game if you're going to look for good players. And there's a lot of players in this year's draft that I think embody these traits specifically. The first one I want to highlight here is Reed Sheppard, one of the most polarizing prospects in this year's draft. Some people think that he is not very good at all. Some people look at him and probably say, oh my gosh, he's a tiny white dude who, yeah, like he jumped well at the combine, but doesn't look the most athletic player ever. Like, people are underwhelmed when we talk about this guy as a top 5 pick, and I could not be further in disagreement with that. I think he very well could be the first overall pick. Now, I don't think he actually will be, but I think it would be fairly warranted if he ended up being selected first overall because he is awesome at dribbling, passing, and shooting. He shot over 52% from 3. He ranked in the 100th percentile as a spot-up player. I believe averaged 1.5 points per possession as a spot-up guy. So not only was he elite catching and shooting, which a lot of that comes into play on spot-up opportunities, but he also played off the catch really well. And that's one of the things I love about him. As a prospect, usually at the top of the draft, you're looking for someone who's going to be your primary on-ball creator. But that's where a lot of teams go wrong, and that's where a lot of those big draft busts like a Johnny Flynn happen, because you're not taking players who are well-rounded players who you can trust to be really darn good, both on and off the basketball. And that's something I think Reed Sheppard's going to be. I think he's going to be really good on the ball, and I think he's going to be fantastic off of the basketball as well. When he did have opportunities to create for their offense, he averaged nearly 5 assists per game, playing only 28 minutes per game off the bench. If you look at his on-off splits from a net rating perspective, you will be blown away for how impactful he was for Kentucky this past year, coming off the bench for Coach Calipari. He's an effective pick-and-roll ball handler. I think he's been fairly successful in his isolation opportunities. He's not going to be the best isolation player, but my comp for him, I've got 2 different comps, okay? So hear me out. Now, there is no such thing as a perfect comparison. Every single player, every single prospect is their own prospect. So these comparisons are loose examples of how their careers and play styles could kind of shift and form throughout their careers. My first one is a more shooting, a little bit less playmaking version of Mike Conley, who also has extremely quick hands. Reed Sheppard has been really notorious with his steal rate from his first year of college basketball, where he had a crazy steal rate, a crazy amount of steals as a freshman. Mike Conley's another guy who defensively just finds a way to get his hand on the basketball, had a lot of strip downs, still does even as a 36-year-old. And I think from a size profile as well, very similar to Reed Sheppard. Both of them about 6'1", 6'2"-ish. I'm taller than both Reed Sheppard and Mike Conley. Now, they're both way better than me at basketball, so not knocking them there at all. They're both awesome players. But I think with Conley, his ability to kind of slow and steady, handle the basketball. He's safe and secure with it. He's not going to turn over the ball a ton. Now, he's not going to have all of these home run highlight plays where you're like, oh my gosh, Mike Conley. But what you're going to say when you watch a full game of Mike Conley playing basketball, your main takeaway is usually, wow, he's just in control of the entire game, very steady, reliable, and I think Reed Sheppard on the basketball can be like that. And Mike Conley throughout his entire career has been a good shooter. Now, early in his career didn't shoot a ton, but I also want to attribute that to the era. He shot it really well when he did shoot it early in his career, but remember, he's playing for the Grit and Grind Grizzlies. They weren't asking him to shoot 7 threes a game. I think that's something he would have been capable of doing, especially if you look at how his career's played out as a shooter. He's been really good for a while. I think Reed Sheppard's a way better shooter than Mike Conley even. So that comparison kind of, I think, makes some sense to me from a size profile, the quickness in their hands defensively and their feet defensively, and then also offensively, just the ability to toggle between on-ball and off-ball responsibilities, the value of that. I think if you went back and redrafted Mike Conley's draft class, you'd easily slot him into the top 5 or 6 players without a shadow of the doubt, and that's why I think Reed Sheppard in a draft that there's no real consensus number 1 pick makes a real lot of sense for any team looking to just get a good player. Reed Sheppard's going to be a very, very good NBA player. My other comp for him is maybe a smaller Austin Reeves, but a way better shooting Austin Reeves. And again, you think about Austin Reeves and some of his value playing around LeBron James. At times, LeBron has really allowed Austin Reeves to handle the basketball, create in the pick and roll. Those are things Sheppard's going to be capable of doing as well. But unlike Austin Reeves, and one of the biggest issues the Lakers had this year, they did not shoot a high volume of threes around LeBron James and Anthony Davis, and they did not shoot threes extremely well either. Someone like Reed Sheppard, I think, will be a smoother fit even than someone like Austin Reeves, just because of the shooting gravity that Sheppard would provide to a half-court offense. For me, I think he should be really strongly in consideration for a top 2 or 3 pick this year. I think if the Houston Rockets get Reed Sheppard 3rd overall, it's going to be a huge steal in my opinion. I think he's a perfect fit into what Houston needs. I really like Sheppard's game, and I think he's going to be a tremendous get for whoever ends up drafting him ultimately on June 26th. The next prospect I want to highlight here is another Kentucky guard in Rob Dillingham. Now, you saw both Sheppard and Dillingham on the thumbnail for today's video. Dillingham shot over 44% from 3, and I think a lot of his volume came on difficult looks, whether they were extremely deep catch-and-shoot shots, contested catch-and-shoot shots, or just, quite frankly, off-the-dribble shooting. And earlier we talked about what I evaluate in shooting and the value of pull-up jump shooting, fadeaway jump shooting, the ability to stop on a dime, stop and pop. Those are things Rob Dillingham's been very, very good at for a while, even back to his time in high school, back to his time playing for Overtime Elite with the Cold Hearts. He has this creativity to his game offensively where he's able to not only play off the basketball, which is going to be one of the values that he brings to a team, but the fact that he's able to create for himself at a high volume and a high efficiency standpoint. Shot over 47% from the field in his freshman season, and for a small guard, that's a difficult ask, but he shot the ball so well. I'm a big believer in his overall shooting talent, and as you can tell from this video, I'm a big believer in shooting and the value of shooting in team-oriented basketball. If you want to surround your star players with shooting, you're going to find success. And I think for a team like San Antonio, for example, if they walk away with Rob Dillingham in this draft, whether that's at pick number 4 or pick number 8, they should have a huge grin on their face because of the amount of value that will add next to Victor Wembanyama. You know, thinking about some of the best players in NBA history, their lives just get easier when you have a really dynamic spot-up guy. Like even someone like Shane Battier, late in his career when he joined Miami as well, had a really important and pivotal role playing next to LeBron James and Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh on some of those Heat teams in the 2010s. I think Rob Dillingham next to Victor Wembanyama could create a really dynamic two-man game in the pick and roll. Teams at some point will be worried about Dillingham, not only his quickness coming off of screens, but his shot-making ability if you're playing drop coverage and trying to limit Victor Wembanyama by mucking up the paint. Well, having an elite pull-up jump shooter, someone who has a lot of upside offensively in Rob Dillingham could make him really special. I think one thing that has been really undersold this entire draft process is Dillingham's playmaking ability. He has a ton of reps and a ton of effective, efficient pick and roll usage throughout his playing career. Obviously, his 1 year at Kentucky, he was an efficient and effective pick and roll ball handler. But going back to his overtime elite days playing for the Cold Hearts, he took the Cold Hearts to the championship game against the City Reapers, where he faced Amen Thompson, Ausar Thompson. Now, they did lose in the championship against the Thompson twins, but Rob Dillingham was the star player. He was the star show for those Cold Hearts teams. I've liked him for a very long time. I think Dillingham is an absolute bucket. I think he's someone who can make reads out of the pick and roll. Now, he doesn't have the size, the positional size to really weaponize other parts of the floor. That's going to be one of the big flaws in his game. He's going to be a little bit more turnover prone likely because of that, but I'm not going to make the same mistake I made with Trae Young and overlook the awesome offensive traits he has because of some of the big questions I have physically about his frame, his weight, his size, his length, his wingspan. There are some massive red flags there for Rob Dillingham, and that is part of the reason why he won't be going first overall or second overall or third overall in this draft most likely. But if we evaluate him as an offensive talent and you look purely at the skills, there are so many things to love from a quickness standpoint, a long speed standpoint, a shot making standpoint. I'm super high on Rob Dillingham's game because of his overall collection of offensive traits that will make him a dynamic scorer first, but with the ability to create for others after his handle, and his scoring gravity puts defenses in a bind, allowing for Victor Wembanyama to get open, or whatever team ends up drafting Rob Dillingham. He's going to be able to fit passes into some of these guys and really open up opportunities for them. Now, my favorite under-the-radar prospect in this year's draft is Ajay Mitchell. You guys know I've been raving about Ajay Mitchell for a while. A lot of people seem to think Ajay Mitchell is a second-round talent in this year's draft. I just, quite frankly, cannot understand that thought process. Not only does he have prototypical guard size, but he plays very similar to Jalen Brunson. Now, I'm not saying he's going to be Jalen Brunson. Brunson came out of Villanova as a well-documented, very good three-point shooter, had a lot of volume in college, and was really, really consistent in college. Now, Ajay Mitchell's been a little bit more up and down through his 3 years for UC Santa Barbara, but this kid can really play because he has the change of pace and change of direction element as a ball handler. We talked about the importance of that. Creating opportunities, beating your man off the bounce on the perimeter. If you can change pace, change direction, it is a lot harder to stay in front of you. I think Ajay Mitchell's got a very good sense of ability to change pace, change direction. He can play balanced off of 2 feet extremely well, and as a byproduct of that, he's very creative as a finisher. That opens up a lot of his up and unders. That's where the play style comparison to someone like Jalen Brunson, I think, makes a lot of sense. Now, Mitchell's a little bit bigger, a little bit worse of a shooter, probably a little bit worse of a passer. Again, I'm not saying he's going to be Jalen Brunson 2.0, but from a play style standpoint, the types of shots that they're going to be able to create, the types of looks that they're going to be able to get, and the way that they play the game, playing off of 2 feet, playing balanced, utilizing your pivot foot as a scorer, there's a lot to love. Obviously, the left-handed aspect comes into my comparison a little bit here. Again, I'm not saying he's going to be Jalen Brunson 2.0. That's super important. I want to make sure I'm very clear that he's not Jalen Brunson 2.0, because Jalen Brunson is an all-NBA caliber player. I'm not saying Ajay Mitchell will be, but what I do think Ajay Mitchell will become is a starting level point guard, someone that people are going to say, wow, how did this guy go this late in the draft? In a draft that no one was really sure about the top picks, why did this guy go as late as he did? I think Ajay Mitchell is going to be an awesome steal for whoever gets him. If I was Orlando at 18, I would be extremely ecstatic about drafting Ajay Mitchell. If I was New Orleans at 21, I would take him. Like, to be honest, I'd take him a lot higher than even those spots. But if he's available for those teams, they should definitely pounce on that opportunity to add someone who's going to be able to create for himself and for others. Averaged, I believe, almost 4 assists per game this past year for UC Santa Barbara. A lot of on-ball volume, and he shot over 39% from 3 this past year. Again, he's been a little bit more of a shaky shooter throughout his college career. This is part of why I don't believe he's the next Jalen Brunson from an actual success accolade standpoint, but from a play style standpoint, he is just very eerily similar to Mr. Number 11 for the New York Knicks. Thank you all so much for watching. There's other players in this draft that I didn't highlight that I would have loved to talk about a little bit more. Baylor Shireman from Creighton, another dribble pass shoot guy. Devin Carter, I think, has the potential to be a really good dribble pass shoot guy. Jared McCain has that upside as well. And then there's even some bigs who have some of that capability. Day'Ron Holmes, the second. Now, those players, it looks a little bit different. Their passing is typically dribble handoffs. Their dribbling is, face-up game and attacking off of 1 or 2 quick dribbles. It's a little bit of a different thing. So I wanted to mostly talk about perimeter offensive players in this video, but even some bigs in this draft. Even Alex Sarr has some potential to grow into here. So I'm extremely excited about this draft class. For a long time, I've been saying I think it's a pretty good class, a class that I am extremely invested in. And I think that there's going to be a lot of good players from. I know most people have typically called it a weak draft. I think the issue is they're not understanding the fact that just because there's not a clear, concise number 1 generational talent doesn't mean that the entire class as a whole is weak. In fact, I think the class is very balanced. I think anywhere from picks 1 through 45 in this draft, you could find a good player depending on who ends up going where in this year's draft. There's 35, 40 guys that I like quite a bit, and I'm pretty confident that at least 20 of them will hit pretty well, which is a really strong draft class if you look at historical success from classes. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys enjoyed hearing my draft philosophy. It was a lot of fun to talk about, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.